The oak-paneled courtroom was already humming with a low tension, the kind that clung to the air before a thunderstorm. Journalists lined the back wall, pens poised above notepads, cameras silently tracking every twitch and whisper. The overhead lights bathed everything in a pale, sterile glow that made even the most confident faces look a shade paler. Jasmine Crockett, poised at the plaintiff's table, didn't look up as the murmurs rolled around her. She was rifling through a leather satchel, her movements deliberate but without hesitation, like someone who knew exactly where the knife was hidden. Across the room, Judge Clarence Thomas sat back in his high-backed chair, eyes narrowed, watching her with the careful stillness of a man used to control. The gavel rested loosely in his hand. The sound hit the room like a sharp, clean crack, the dull thump of heavy paper against wood. Jasmine had pulled out a thick yellowed envelope, its edges worn and curling as though it had been passed through many hands before this day. She set it down on the table in front of her, perfectly centered, as if she were placing a chess piece for a final checkmate. A few in the gallery shifted forward in their seats. No one spoke. The court stenographer's fingers hovered in a half-second pause above her keyboard. Even the faint whir of the ceiling fans seemed to dim. Clarence Thomas adjusted his glasses and leaned forward a fraction of an inch, the closest thing to alarm anyone had seen from him all morning. "Ms. Crockett," he said, his tone measured, "I trust whatever you're about to produce is both relevant and admissible." Her lips curved just enough to suggest a smile, though her eyes stayed locked on the envelope. "Relevant?" she echoed, her voice low but carrying. "It's definitive." That word landed like a stone in still water. Cameras clicked. A microphone somewhere gave a faint feedback squeal. Thomas's fingers flexed against the armrest. "Proceed," he said. Jasmine slid the envelope across the polished surface until it stopped just inches from the court clerk. "Inside," she said, "is a document your honor has not seen. A document that was never meant to leave a locked federal archive." The back row erupted into a rustle of whispers. A reporter mouthed something that could only be classified. Thomas lifted his chin, the muscle in his jaw tightening. "You're treading on dangerous ground, Ms. Crockett." "That's the only ground worth treading when the truth is buried there," she replied, her voice gaining steel. From somewhere near the door, a security officer stepped forward, unsure whether to act. The clerk glanced toward the bench, awaiting a nod that never came. Jasmine, still standing tall, tapped the envelope once with her index finger, not hurried, not hesitant, just enough to draw every eye back to it. The moment stretched, every tick of the courtroom clock felt louder than the last, and then, almost imperceptibly, the gavel shifted in Thomas's grip. For a long second no one moved. The envelope sat there, an unassuming rectangle of faded paper, yet it felt like the heaviest object in the room. Then Jasmine Crockett broke the stillness. She placed both palms flat on the table, leaning slightly forward, her voice slicing clean through the hush. "This," she said, "is a classified memorandum. Stamped, sealed, and restricted to eyes that swore an oath to keep it hidden." A low wave of reaction rolled through the gallery. A gasp here, a muttered, "Oh my God," there. The court reporter's hands trembled slightly over the stenograph keys, struggling to keep pace. Clarence Thomas stiffened in his chair, his eyes, usually heavy-lidded and controlled, sharpened like glass. "Ms. Crockett," he said, his tone colder now, "you are under oath. If you proceed, you are placing yourself in jeopardy." Jasmine didn't blink. "The jeopardy," she said, "is in what happens if the public never learns what's in this file." A sudden flurry of clicks filled the room as every camera in the press gallery leaned forward for a shot. The gold government seal on the envelope caught the light for the briefest moment before Jasmine's hand covered it. She looked directly at Thomas now. "This document," she continued, "contains communications between senior judicial staff and outside lobbyists. It details meetings, exchanges, and—" She tapped the envelope once, sharply. "Promises made outside of any legal framework, with the power to influence court decisions." The sound of chairs creaking and people shifting became a low background static. One man in the gallery whispered something about conflict of interest, and another immediately shushed him. The tension wasn't just palpable, it was suffocating. Thomas's voice rose, resonant against the wood-paneled walls. You will surrender that envelope to the court for sealed review. Immediately. Jasmine's chin lifted. No, Your Honor. This is evidence, and it belongs in the light. A murmur swelled into a wave of noise. A court officer took a single step toward her table, but halted when the press surged forward, microphones extending like spears. Jasmine turned slightly, enough so the cameras could catch the determination in her eyes. If you think I'm afraid to put this on the record, she said, you're mistaken. I've faced bigger bullies than a bench. The clerk's hands hovered uncertainly over the envelope, torn between protocol and the dangerous electricity sparking through the room. Outside the courthouse, a distant chant could be heard and the sound of protesters whose numbers had doubled in the last hour. Thomas leaned forward, gavel in hand, but didn't strike. He was watching her now, not as a witness, but as an adversary. And Jasmine, sensing it, let the silence hang just long enough for the cameras to drink it in. She placed a single sheet of paper, a photocopy of the memo's cover page, flat on the table. The bold red stamp at the top read, "Classified." The reaction was instant and chaotic. Gasps, hurried scribbling, cameras snapping. And though she hadn't yet revealed the contents, the message was clear. The rules had just been broken. The gallery's noise was a restless ocean now, swelling, breaking, and crashing in bursts of overlapping voices. A bailiff barked for order, but the words dissolved into the rising tide of murmurs. Clarence Thomas's hand hovered over the gavel like a drawn sword he wasn't sure he wanted to swing. Jasmine Crockett stood perfectly still, one palm resting lightly on the envelope, her other hand holding the single photocopied cover sheet between her fingers. The red classified stamp glared under the overhead lights like an open wound. "Let's be clear," she said, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "You all saw me place this document here. You all heard me say where it came from, and you all understand that the people deserve to know." The room didn't breathe. Clarence Thomas inhaled sharply, his voice dripping with the kind of authority that had silenced entire courtrooms before. "You are playing with federal fire, Miss Crockett. If you read from that document, you will have crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed." She tilted her head slightly, almost as though weighing the warning in her mind, but her eyes never wavered. "Some lines," she replied, "only exist to keep the truth chained." The moment had begun. A producer in the press row raised 2 fingers to a cameraman, the silent signal to zoom in. The digital clock above the courtroom doors read exactly 12:43. Second one. Jasmine slid the cover sheet to the edge of the table so the front row could see the heading. Second 2, a ripple of whispers shot through the reporters as they recognized a government letterhead not meant for public eyes. Second 3, Clarence Thomas's eyes narrowed, scanning for a possible motion to halt the proceedings. Second 4, Jasmine's voice returned, steady as stone. Page 1 of this memorandum references a meeting that took place, off the record, between this court staff and a registered lobbyist for an energy conglomerate currently under investigation. Gasps, pen scratching furiously. Second 5, Thomas's hand twitched toward the gavel, then froze. Second 6, a man in the third row muttered, "She's actually doing it." Second 7, Jasmine set the cover sheet aside and reached back toward the envelope. Second 8, the bailiff took one cautious step forward. Second 9, Thomas's voice cut in, "Ms. Crockett." Second 10. She raised a hand to silence him. Second 11. The gallery reacted to the gesture like a spark to dry tinder, half outrage, half awe. Second 12. Jasmine withdrew a second page, this one with dense typewritten paragraphs and margin notes in blue ink. Second 13. A cameraman muttered, "We're live," into his headset. Second 14. Thomas's face changed. The shift was small but unmistakable. The mask of judicial calm fractured and something raw flashed in his eyes. Recognition. It was the look of a man who had just realized the paper in her hand was the real thing, and that its words could burn down more than just a reputation. The courtroom exhaled in a collective gasp like a single organism hit by the same electric shock. A young reporter in the front row whispered, "Oh, this is history," and another corrected him softly, "No, this is war." Cameras whirred and clicked like gunfire. Somewhere outside, sirens began to wail, not because of what had been revealed, but because word had already reached the streets. The protests outside were swelling, feeding on rumors racing faster than the facts. Thomas tried again, voice raised now. "I will not allow—" Jasmine cut him off, her words sharp and precise. "You don't allow the truth, Your Honor. The truth exists without your permission." The gavel came down hard. Crack, the sound ricocheting off the paneled walls. But it was too late. The moment, those 14 seconds, had been captured from 5 different angles, broadcast live, and clipped into the digital bloodstream. By the time the echo faded, the clip was already trending. In homes, bars, and phones across the country, millions were watching Thomas's expression freeze in that split second between power and panic. Memes sprouted in real time, hashtags bloomed. Dwan 14 seconds, Wan do a memo gate, Wan Crockett files. Inside the courtroom, the air had shifted. It was no longer just a legal proceeding, it was a battlefield. The clip hit the internet like a dropped match in dry brush. Within minutes, not hours, not days, but minutes, the 14-second microdrama had been sliced, captioned, slowed to half speed, and set to a dozen different soundtracks. The screen grab of Justice Clarence Thomas's face and the precise instant recognition cracked through the judicial mask became the image of the day. Talk radio hosts ran it on their home pages. Producer group chats lit up with a single directive: "Get Crockett. Now." Jasmine didn't celebrate. She stood in a quiet hallway outside the courtroom, one hand on the cool plaster, breathing through the whir of approaching footsteps and the heat of camera lights rounding the corner. Her phone vibrated once, then again, until the notifications were a steady hum. Texts from attorneys, staffers, a retired senator who had once told her politics was a long hallway with no windows. She silenced the device and slid it into her pocket. A producer in a navy blazer skidded to a stop beside her. "Congresswoman, Liv hits all afternoon. We'll truck a camera anywhere you want. Can you confirm the memo's chain of custody? Who touched it? Who logged it? When did—" Jasmine shook her head. "I will not contaminate evidence on live television." "Then give me a headline." She looked past him toward the courthouse steps where the first phalanx of microphones was forming like an iron forest. "Here's your headline," she said. "The public paid in. The public earned transparency. It's their democracy. It's their money." The producer blinked, satisfied and unsatisfied at once. He pivoted to the cameras. Across town, in a glass-walled control room stacked with screens, a cable anchor pressed a finger to her earpiece. "Breaking tonight," she began, her voice warmed with controlled urgency. "Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett has introduced a document into court that appears to be marked classified." The court gasped. The judge paused. And in exactly 14 seconds, everything changed. A graphic flared across the bottom of the screen. 14 seconds. That shook the court. Clips of legal analysts stacked up in digital cues. One spoke of contempt and sealing orders. Another raised the specter of unauthorized possession. A third, older and slower, murmured, "The real story is not the stamp. It's the substance. If those margin notes connect staff to lobby pressure, we are beyond scandal." The control room punched from square to square as if switching between battlegrounds in a war. Thomas did not sit for interviews. He convened. Behind a heavy door, he gathered senior clerks and counsel around a slab of walnut. Phones were deposited on a side table. A legal pad, nothing else, lay before him. He spoke without ornament. "We will motion to seal," he said. "We will compel surrender and chain of custody. We will prepare a contempt order if necessary." He paused. "And we will do it at speed." A clerk with sharp eyes but careful posture asked the question that had lodged in everyone else's throat. "Sir, are the notes—" "Do not finish that sentence," Thomas said, so softly it chilled the room. Down the block, in a townhouse with tasteful curtains and a discreet security camera tucked under the eaves, a lobbyist in a silk tie took his own meeting. He didn't use the word damage. He preferred misunderstanding. "We emphasize process," he told his clients. "Chain of custody, classification protocols, reckless handling of sensitive material. We speak gravely about norms. We whip up statements from retired officials who never saw the memo but care deeply about the sanctity of the archive." He smiled thinly. "We will sound like priests at a broken altar." Within an hour, the talking points bled into the bloodstream. Reckless, theatrical, jeopardizes institutions. Botnets echoed the phrasing with eerie precision. Anonymous accounts pushed a story that Jasmine had plagiarized a brief in law school, a charge as flimsy as tissue but engineered to smudge and blur, to plant a hairline crack that algorithms could widen. Jasmine's team met in a cramped office that smelled of toner and coffee. A TV on mute showed a split screen, Jasmine's set jaw on one side, a carousel of commentators on the other. "We cannot get dragged into process talk," said her counsel, a woman with silver streaks at her temples and the kind of calm that steadies boats in bad weather. "We talk substance and people. If the memo shows an arrangement, we connect it to consequences, rates, bills, layoffs, real lives." A field organizer in a distressed denim jacket slid a printout across the table, a schedule with thick black lines crossing out rallies that had already doubled in size. "Vets at 1,700, he said. "Mill workers at 1,900. They want you to look them in the eye and tell them what this means." Jasmine nodded. "We show up, not on a stage, on the ground." Her phone vibrated again, a number not saved. She let it ring twice and answered. A voice she hadn't heard in years, precise, unhurried, introduced himself simply as an old clerk who believes in oaths. "If what you have is what I think you have," he said, "there is a second packet. Not in the archive, in a safe deposit box." A beat. "You didn't get this from me." "How do I find it?" Jasmine asked. "Look for what isn't on the inventory list," the voice replied, and the line went dead. She stared at the phone. Her counsel read her face. "A source?" "Maybe a conscience," Jasmine said. Outside, the courthouse steps had become an amphitheater. A ring of microphones glittered in the afternoon light. Jasmine stepped into the circle. The crowd shifted forward until the marble railings creaked. She raised a palm, not to silence, but to steady. "Some will tell you this is about rules," she began. "They will say the stamp matters more than the sentences. They will make it about me because they cannot afford for it to be about you." She spoke without notes. "You paid in. You earned it. It is your money, your power, your right to know whether decisions were tilted by private promises. I am not here to play talking points. I am here because when the powerful whisper in secret, those whispers become prices you pay at the pharmacy, on your electric bill, in the hours you work and the hours you lose with your kids." A veteran in a faded cap raised his hand. "What happens to you now?" he asked. "They're saying contempt. They're saying jail." Jasmine met his eyes. "If the cost of telling you the truth is a cell," she said, "then I will count nights, not regrets." The crowd surged, not with chants, but with a low, steady sound, the sound of people deciding to stand their ground. Phones rose like fireflies. An old woman on the steps wiped her eyes with the hem of her cardigan and whispered, "About time." The counterattack sharpened. That evening, a court filing hit the docket, an emergency motion to seal the envelope and any reproductions, to compel immediate surrender and to prohibit further disclosure under threat of contempt. The language was dry enough to crack, but the intent snapped like a trap. A second filing followed from a friendly nonprofit that billed itself as a guardian of institutional integrity. It lamented reckless politicization of sensitive materials and warned of norm erosion. The board list read like a who's who of former officials who never lost sleep over a single unaffordable bill. In parallel, a whisper campaign blossomed that Jasmine's office had coordinated with partisans to stage a show trial, that a friendly staffer had slipped her a copy, that the copy was forged. Each rumor contradicted the last, but the point was not coherence. The point was noise, enough noise to drown a signal. Jasmine's counsel watched the waves from behind a stack of binders. "They are trying to force a process cage," she said, tapping the motion to seal. "We cannot accept the terms of the fight." "Then we change the field," Jasmine replied. "We take the stakes to the people most affected." The next morning, the cameras found her not on a cable couch, but on a sidewalk outside a shuttered textile plant. Workers gathered in jackets against a stubborn wind. She held up her hands to warm them with her breath and began. "This is not about a memo," she said. "It is about a promise that decisions would be made in daylight, by law, with accountability. If the memo shows a secret bargain that touched a ruling, then that ruling touched your lives. That is not politics. That is survival." A man with calloused palms lifted a laminated pay stub. "I did the math," he said. "After that ruling, the company's rates changed. Overtime shrank. My kid's medication is now a choice between medicine or rent. If there's a paper where someone promised a favor to keep those numbers high—" Jasmine nodded once, as if sealing a pact. "Then we will put that paper where everyone can see it." By midday, the hearing rooms of 3 local stations were packed with callers. A grandmother demanded to know why a judge's staff would ever meet with lobbyists. A young mother asked whether her late fees were really the shadow of a handshake. The shift from the abstract to the intimate was complete. The narrative no longer lived in marble halls, it lived in kitchens and glove compartments and lunch pails. Back downtown, the war rooms hummed. Thomas's advisors drafted a statement that said everything and nothing. It praised institutions. It condemned theatrics. It did not mention the word promise. It did not mention notes in blue ink. It invoked solemnity like incense. The lobbyist's townhouse hosted a smaller, sterner gathering. "If there is a second packet," he said through teeth that barely moved, "we intercept it. If we cannot intercept it, we discredit the courier." He passed out index cards with talking points that boiled down to one command: make the messenger the story. Late afternoon, Jasmine's counsel returned from the clerk's office with a copy of the emergency motion. "Hearing on the seal request," she said. "Sooner than we like." "How soon?" She lifted a brow to remind them of their own rule. "Soon." Jasmine looked at the envelope on the table, the yellow corners, the soft curve where the flap had been handled and rehandled. She could feel the weight it put on the air itself, like a storm wall pressing in. Her phone buzzed again, a text from a number with no name and a city code she did not recognize. 2 keys, 1 blue, 1 brass. "Bank on H Street. Ask for a box that isn't on the manifest. You didn't hear it from me." "You never will," her counsel read over her shoulder. "This could be a snare. It could be a lifeline," Jasmine said. A young staffer, cheeks pink from the cold, tapped the TV. A commentator was speaking directly to camera with the cadence of a sermon. "Do not be distracted," he said. "When sunlight meets a secret, the secret screams protocol. Ask yourself why." Jasmine exhaled. "We go to the bank," she said, "and we prepare the committee request. We turn the impulse into action, public action." Her team moved like a small unit under fire, everyone with a task, everyone with a fallback. A draft request for an open hearing took shape on a laptop, its language plain enough for anyone to understand. A route was mapped to the H Street Bank with contingencies for tails. A secure scanner was prepped. A friendly reporter was told only this: watch the committee docket. Watch it closely. As dusk settled, Jasmine stepped outside once more. The protest had grown into something steadier, not just anger, but resolve. A choir from a nearby church had come, and they sang without microphones, their voices rising like breath on cold air. Jasmine stood at the edge of the crowd, unseen for a moment, and let the sound soak into her bones. Her counsel joined her, eyes on the horizon where the courthouse lights burned against the dark. "They will come hard," she said. "They will try to make the next move look like a mistake. They will say you are chasing spectacle." "Then we will give them substance," Jasmine answered. "And we will put it under lights they cannot control." Behind her, the envelope sat on the table like a small, patient animal. Inside it, words waited, black on white, ink cut into fibers. To do what words have always done when courage opens a door. Change the room they enter. Jasmine took one last look at the courthouse. "Tomorrow," she said to no one in particular, "we stop talking about the memo. We begin acting on the memo." She turned back to her team. "We move." Before the sun rose, Jasmine's open hearing demand hit the Oversight Committee, a direct, unflinching call for the entire memo to be revealed without redaction. By mid-morning, the leak to the press made it impossible to ignore. Supporters framed it as courage, opponents called it a breach. Ignoring the noise, Jasmine moved on the H Street Bank lead. In the early afternoon, with a small crowd of veterans, workers, and community members outside for cover, she entered the vault with the blue and brass keys. The safe deposit box contained a second packet, pages stamped, classified and handwritten notes linking judicial staff to policy shifts that cost ordinary people real money. Her team scanned the contents, then secured them. Hours later, Jasmine walked into the committee chamber carrying both envelopes. Live cameras rolled as she set them on the witness table. She spoke not of politics, but of promises broken, of how secret deals raised bills, cut wages, and bent the law against those without power. Thomas never directly addressed the revelations. The motion to seal died under public pressure. Outside, as Jasmine left the chamber, the crowd erupted, not with chants of victory, but with the sound of people ready for the next fight. She paused on the steps, knowing the battle had shifted. The documents were out. The damage to those who hid them was irreversible. And somewhere, in a vault or drawer, there were always more papers waiting for someone unafraid to open them.